Welcome to another edition of the MIA All Day Podcast. I am your host, Carlos Ledo, coming off the disappointing loss to Florida State, 45-3. Don't really want to get into that today. I've done my venting. I have gone on the Wide Right podcast and discussed the Florida State situation with disgust, if I may say so myself. So if you haven't heard that, go ahead and tune into or download, watch on YouTube, however you guys want to access it. Go check out the Wide Right podcast with Manny Navarro, the last episode, where he and I discussed the Florida State debacle. If you want to hear some of that stuff and a reaction to it and thoughts flowing from that. Today, what am I going to give you? I'm just going to give you some random topics that have been swirling around the week, along with a little bit of information on Georgia Tech, just not a whole lot, because really, man, like at this point, I'm sorry, people, but I'm not going to be breaking down, you know, tendencies of teams anymore. I'm not going to be giving you all that kind of stuff because it ends up being a waste of time. Although, if you go back and you listen to everything I put out there, week to week, I'm pretty damn accurate. Yes, sir. Your boy comes through and gives you the info. I basically tell you how the Hurricanes can piss away the game, and they do. And they follow it up with high accuracy, my friends. They do it pretty well. So let's first get into some of these topics. First of all, shout out to my man Prison Tom. He gave me some topics that have been going around on other podcasts and message boards and things of that nature, swirling around the Hurricane Nation, and it's stuff that I normally don't find out about because I just don't dig that deep into the annals of Hurricane message boards or other podcasts. I just don't have enough time. I wish I could listen to them all, but I just can't. It's impossible. In addition to that, shout out to my man Dick Grayson, A. Tillerson on Twitter. Gave me the heads up about a great article on this guy named Biff Poggi. Biff Poggi is not a the villain for Back to the Future Part 4. That's not who that guy is. Although it sounds like it and it should be. And damn it, if I was writing Back to the Future 4, Biff Poggi, that's my villain. Okay? Write it in there. I'll figure out the plot around that guy. I'm just building the plot around Biff Poggi. Who else? It could be a hybrid between Biff from Back to the Future and a Porg from Star Wars. Biff Porgy. How about that one? Biff Porgy. I'd watch that. I might not enjoy it, but I'll watch it. Anyway, so Biff Poggi essentially is the right-hand man for Jim Harbaugh in the program at Michigan. Serves as sort of his consigliere, the guy who is sort of the middleman between Harbaugh and his staff. He interacts with the staff on a daily basis, sits in meetings, communicates with them, basically does that sort of hands-on stuff for Harbaugh when he can't be there, and helps to create sort of that separation and that buffer between Harbaugh and his staff, whereas that allows the staff to basically do their job and not have too much interference from Harbaugh. And we'll get to that in a minute and talk about how that relates to Miami. So in the article, Bruce Feldman, who wrote the article, was an amazing writer. As you know, has deep connections to the Hurricanes. If you have not read the book Hurricane Mutiny, and you consider yourself a Hurricane fan, and you're capable of reading long form stuff, if you're able to read a book, I would highly recommend that. Great book, Cane Mutiny. Read it. So anyway, the story about Biff Poggi is essentially following Michigan's COVID shortened season in 2020, where they were 2-4. They didn't look good. Harbaugh took a pay cut. Things were sort of tumultuous in the program, and the future was uncertain for Harbaugh. Harbaugh brings in Biff Poggi, who had coached on his staff years earlier, when he first got to Michigan, and has him there as sort of his confidant, as the guy that he can go to for, advice. Biff is an older guy, heavy set, gregarious guy, and he's got a personality where he doesn't take shit from anybody and just going to be very blunt. Speaking to that, there's a part in the article where it talks about Biff being brought on to identify what the issues are with the offense, specifically because the offense was so bad in 2020. And Biff comes up to Josh Gattis and asks him, "Hey, I'm here to figure out if you're part of the problem or part of the solution." And he was just straight up with Josh Gattis like that. He's basically told him, "I need to figure out if you're the right guy or if we got to get rid of your ass and bring somebody else in to run this offense." And essentially, what ended up happening was Biff discovered because of his sitting in meetings and identifying and really getting to know the coaches and really getting to feel the vibe of the room. Because he wasn't hardball, guys were more free to be who they were. And his reading of the room and the understanding that he came to early on in one of those first meetings was there was a tug of war within the Michigan offensive staff between what Josh Gattis wanted to run and what some other guys that were hardball holdovers wanted to run. So the hardball holdovers wanted to go back to more 21 personnel stuff where you got two backs, one tight end, Stanford stuff where they ran and they were successful, maybe incorporate some of the stuff from the 49ers. Whereas Gaddis wanted to bring over the offense that, was run by Alabama with Tua, run some of that Joe Moorhead Penn State stuff. All those things he wanted to incorporate, mainly a lot of RPO game, along with his power and gap scheme, pin and pull stuff in the run game. So Biff essentially sits in the meeting, stands up and asks at the beginning of one meeting, asks Josh Gaddis if he could, talk at the beginning of the meeting and say a few words. And Josh Gaddis allows him. And he essentially says to the group of coaches, you guys don't understand how Josh feels up here. He sometimes holds back on answers or doesn't want to fully answer your questions because he feels like it's an "I gotcha" question. You guys are throwing questions at him to try and find any fault in the scheme, or to try and discourage him from, moving forward with a particular game plan or scheme set. And he turns around and looks at Josh Gaddis and says, isn't that true?" And he says, "Yeah, absolutely." He essentially discovered that there was no trust between the offensive coordinator and the offensive staff. And what he ended up doing was getting these guys together and saying, "Listen, we're all going to go around the room and we're going to reveal something personal about ourselves, something deeply personal, and we don't tell anybody else. And I'm going to start." So, Biff is 62 years old. He starts talking about how the greatest joy in his life is being a father, but he feels like he's been a failure as a father. How he hasn't been there for his kids, how he barely remembers them growing up and events in their lives because he was so committed to football and being a coach. Um, and then, the other guys going around the room, and I think it was Sharon Moore, the offensive line coach then, now co-OC at Michigan. He brought something up and he was in tears about, things that he was talking about. And it bonded the staff together because what it did was it broke down the walls of macho bravado, of, I know more than you, ego, and created a foundation for trust and communication amongst the staff, where they were vulnerable to one another and being honest and open with one another about what they thought. And it wasn't anymore about trying to stab each other in the back or try and climb up the ladder or trying to show off who had the best scheme or who had the most football knowledge. At the end of the day, they came together for a common goal. And it really worked, as you saw, for Michigan's offense last year. So that's one. So that article sort of talks about that whole process. And why do I think that's important to bring up? And why do I think it's interesting? I think it's interesting because I think we may be facing something similar, with the Hurricanes. I think not necessarily completely with the offensive staff being at odds, but I think part of it is the players, as we've heard, which is something that my man Prison Tom brought up, being at odds with the coaching staff over the scheme, and the style of play that they want to implement. And I talked about this on Wide Right, and I've talked about this a few times over the last, over the course of the season, where I believe maybe the issue is, connecting with these players. It falls on the coaches because they have not done the job of breaking down the barriers and the walls and creating that layer of trust and breaking down, that wall and creating that sense of vulnerability amongst each other where you're connecting for a common goal, and that hasn't happened. You could see now, the wheels are starting to fall off, and guys aren't playing for the staff. They're not even playing for each other at this point, and that's not healthy. That doesn't make for a good program. Um, and I think, in that role of Biff, I think Alonzo Highsmith could certainly play that role. And I think that was something that Manny brought up a little bit in White Rider in our last episode, where he talked about, him being confident not only in Mario as a recruiter, but also confident in Alonzo Highsmith to be able to identify talent, not just in high school, but also through the portal, and sort of be a sounding board for Mario, um, moving forward as another set of eyes for his staff and his team. And I think Alonzo Highsmith can certainly serve in that Biff Poggi role for the Hurricanes. And I think, one of the things that Prison Tom brought up, um, and my man Kane Six also brought up something on Twitter, was that there's a rumor going around that, Gattis is coaching things one way, and then Frank Ponce is turning around and coaching in a different way in terms of how the quarterbacks are set to read the defense or how to operate the offense within the game plan and the scheme that they have set up for that week. This has been put out there and people are talking about it. And I can't tell you one way or another if it's true or not. I can give you my logic on it. Take it, leave it, wipe your ass with it. But here's what I'm going to say. As an offensive staff, as a coaching staff in general, you meet as a coaching staff as a whole to try and get organized for the week coming up and the week's opponent. You then break out into your offensive and defensive rooms meetings. You're going over tape and game planning based on what your opponent's doing and what you want to do to attack that. So offensively, you're going through the game film and you're identifying what they have in terms of tendencies on defense, maybe personal matchups that you feel good about, and then you are implementing a game plan, a scheme that fits within your overall offensive scheme to attack those weaknesses. So the offensive coordinator is going to work in conjunction with everybody in the room to create this game plan. It's very collaborative, and Mario said that that's the way he works from the beginning. So Mario's involved in these game plannings also. So after they come up with a game plan, they identify the play sets they're going to run, right? The set plays they're going to run, or the things that they've identified and the matchups they want to attack. They've already got their base read concepts, right? So let's say they're running a specific play. Let's get for sake of argument, let's say it's an RPO play. The reads are identified. These are the guys you are reading in the RPO. Base, this is what we do, right? In this game plan, we may switch that to we're going to read this other guy. We're going to RPO off this other guy because of the way they play their defense or coverage or how they specifically align to an offensive formation that we're going to try and take advantage of, right? So everybody's on the same page. If Frank Ponce were to deviate from that, it would be very obvious and the head coach would know. And do you think the head coach would allow that? Do you think the head coach would just allow Frank Ponce to change the entire read scheme? Second of all, if Frank Ponce is changing the read scheme after they've been in a meeting and all discussed it and agreed this is the best way to attack the defense, don't you think that the change is going to be negative? That the negative result is going to be pretty obvious? On top of that, they have to practice. They have to run these schemes in practice. So if Frank Ponce is telling the quarterback to read a different progression, to read a different guy in the RPO scheme, to do something else other than what's been game planned, coaches are going to see it on the field. And you don't think that's going to get corrected or it's going to get stopped? So that being said, and this goes back to the same bullshit that we heard earlier in the year that TVD wasn't meeting with Ponce and Gattis, or Gattis and Ponce weren't meeting with TVD as much as they were until he struggled, and then they started meeting with him finally together, which is bullshit. I can tell you that's bullshit. From my experience and knowledge of how coaching staffs work and how you prep players for a week, the offense coordinator and the quarterback coach will meet together with the quarterback. They will be on the same page. The quarterback coach's job is to execute the offense that the offense coordinator has laid out in the same manner the offensive coordinator wants it to be executed. There is nothing to be gained by switching things up because the OC is going to call those plays, and if they're run incorrectly, guess who's going to get the blame? The guy changed it all up. And the player's not going to take the bullet for the quarterback coach. The player's going to step right up and say, yo, this guy told me to do that. Right? So if Ponce, essentially, based on this information, is creating a mutiny, you think it would have lasted the season? Come on, man. We got to be a little bit smarter than that. Now, if you connect that initial story about TVD saying that it really wasn't what TVD said, the gist of what he said was that he's meeting with them more now, not that they weren't meeting at all, but everybody took it as they weren't meeting at all with TVD. If you take that spin on that story and you take the spin on this story that offensive coordinator and quarterback coach are on the same page and they're trying to change things up and confusing the quarterbacks, who tends to gain from this narrative? Who looks better spinning out of this narrative, right? The quarterbacks, because now it's not my fault. I wasn't coached properly early in the year. I'm getting conflicting information now. And why would a quarterback? I'm not saying it's TBD. Could be Jake Garcia for reasons that we've seen on the field the last few weeks. Why would a quarterback put that information out to try and take the blame off themselves for struggles with the offense and struggles with their play? Well, if I'm a quarterback that is unhappy, that is not playing well, that wants to move on and has made a decision in my mind that I'm going to transfer at the end of the year, I need to get the stink off of me of this season. I need to create excuses or reasons why my play wasn't at the level of expectation, at the standard that everybody anticipated it being coming into the season. So what do? I point the fingers at coaches, right? And it comes out of sources, and the coaches aren't going to address these rumors. So it's just going to sit out there. It's going to seem like the truth, right? So now you got that narrative out there, and your freedom is open. Your ability to transfer somewhere else without looking, one, like the bad guy because you attach your name to it, and two, like it was your fault that you played poorly, has also been eliminated. So that's my 2 cents on that aspect. But again, going back to the Pogge thing, I think Alonzo Highsmith needs to step in and create some sort of a bridge between the coaching staff and the players, and also the coaching staff and Mario. I think Mario, all accounts have been leading in that he tends to be a control freak, tries to grab the reins of things too much. And I think what he's probably noticed by the end of this season is that this job is way too big for him to try and take the reins on himself. And he's got to let his coaches coach. And somebody's got to tell him that, or else he's going to die of a heart attack. The guy looks defeated week in and week out during the press conference. He's not happy. He's not enjoying this. He cannot wait to the end of the season to be able to sign this class and start bringing in transfers off the transfer portal to turn this roster over. Another thing that my man Prison Tom brought up was, is this style of play and this style of coaching detrimental to the team, being this dictator style? Um, I think it's difficult for the guys that have been there for a while and have been used to the way they were coached before, which was grab assy, friendly, pat on the back, you're my guy, to being held accountable and being held to a standard that they are expected to achieve. Now, if Mario was the only asshole in the country coaching this way, it would be a problem. If there were guys in the country that didn't want to play for Mario because of this, then it would be a problem. But you've got guys that have played for him at Oregon. You've got guys that played for him at Alabama. You got guys that played for him at FIU that love Mario. Guys that played for him at UM when he was an even crazier some of them ish, if you can believe that love Mario and his coaching style. So, Frank Martin, the current UMass basketball coach, former Miami High coach, former South Carolina basketball coach, former Kansas State coach, has been asked in the past on Twitter, and I've seen it, is it difficult coaching this era of kids because, they're softer? And his response has always been, it's not the kids that are softer, it's the adults. The adults are the ones that are relenting on the standard and applying accountability to these kids and making these kids rise to the occasion. They're as capable as any generation, but the adults have to be the one to enforce that, to make them come up to that level, to that standard, and not give in to them. And I think that's part of the thing that's going on here. I think there's a battle of wills between guys that really don't want to do it that much, that don't want to work that hard. And then you've got a guy who's trying to institute a program where accountability is the core value, where there's a standard of how to do things. And you're going to either meet it or you're going to be told when you're not, you're going to be expected to get up to speed to get there. And players are not taking it. Now, like I said before, if he was the only one doing it, it would suck. But you've got Nick Saban, you got Dabo Sweeney, got a bunch of guys in the country that coach this way. Kirby Smart, Jim Harbaugh. And guess what? Their program's pretty damn good, right? Those produce the most NFL players. Those are guys that are preparing these players for the next level, the eventual level. And at the same time, they're preparing them for life. We all know we're all grown ass adults, right? We know life isn't easy. We all know life is not fair. We all know it's going to kick you in the teeth. It's going to punch you in the stomach. And then it's going to expect you to get back up and do it again. Because if not, you can't survive. So why is it wrong to want to expect that from your players and try and instill this in your players? And it's not just about wins and losses, like I'm saying, it's about life. It's about teaching these guys that, listen, I know you've been coddled your whole life. I know you've been the star of your Pop Warner team. You've been the star of your middle school team. You've been the star of your high school team. And everybody's kissed your ass as long as you can remember. And everybody's held you on a pedestal. But that's not life. There are times where you're going to be stuck in the mud and you're going to have to figure a way to get out. And nobody's going to be there to give you a hand. There are going to be times when life beats you down to your core where you feel like there's nothing you can do to keep going. Like you want to, wave the white flag and give up. But in that moment, if you take that one next step to try and free yourself, to take the next step to lift yourself up, that could be the moment that leads to the momentum that gets you where you want to go. And he's trying to teach these kids that. He's trying to teach them to bounce back, to be resilient, to be tough. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think as a society, we've kind of gotten soft as a whole and relenting in the standards that we try to teach and implement our kids. I'm not going to get into a political discussion or a personal, parental, how I raise my kids, because God knows I'm not, I'm not Danny Tanner from Full House, my man. I wish I was. Well, honestly, forget Danny Tanner. If you have kids, or even if you don't have kids, it's a great show, and you've seen Bluey, Bluey's dad, Bandit, that dude, that's a dad, bro. That is the gold standard of dads. And I only wish I could someday attain a piece of that golden coat, Bandit's golden coat that he has as a father, because that's amazing. Obviously, it's a cartoon, it's animated, it's Australian, which also plays into it. So probably never get there, but I'll try because I want to be the best I can be, right, as a father. And I think that's what we need to expect for our kids is, and for these players in this team, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to get there necessarily, but it's okay to try. It's okay to push yourself. It's okay to be, to have people demand things of you. That's okay. Something wrong with that. All right. What else has my man Prison Tom brought up? Let's take a look. There's also a story going around about a player faking an injury during the Virginia game and not wanting to come back in. And I mean, I'm not going to address that because I don't know for sure if that's real or not. Watch me take a sip of my Diet Cokes to get myself fired up for the rest of this. But I think that shows the mentality, the current mentality of that team and the guys who were left over from Manny Diaz, and what was ingrained in them of what was okay. Listen, you're going to see like 40, 50 guys leave this roster at the end of the year. There's going to be a lot of guys gone, guys that you rooted for, guys that you wanted us to land on signing day. They're going to be out the door. Probably some major guys. But this is what's occurring. It is looking ugly right now because it needs to be broken down to the studs. Why does it need to be broken down to the studs? Because of this culture, this mentality, this horseshit attitude that's been going on in this program for way too long. And the only way to correct it, the only way to get through it and get to the other side of where you want to be is to break it down to the studs and get rid of that rot. And yes, it sucks. It sucks to go through it because you're going to have to go through situations like this. You're going to have to go through a season like this where the team is up and down. It's terrible. It's not looking good. And, you want to win. You want to see your team win every Saturday. But that's been the problem for too long. There's been too much sacrificed in the short term to win games and not enough building for the long term. So we've been trading in short-term success, which hasn't even been that successful, in favor of what the long-term success could have been if things were done right. And let's be honest, man, averaging 8-4, 7-5 every year, popping a 9-win season, a 10-win season every 15 years, that's not what you want. And one of the things that Prison Tom brought up also is that they were talking. He heard some talk about Mario's offensive system. The ideal offensive system he wants to run is behind the times and requires too much talent. Um, because it's a pro style system, and the only time we broke away from a pro style system and run a spread system was with Rhett Lashley, and people were pumping up Rhett Lashley that he averaged 35 points a game last year. Okay, I get it, but first of all, let's not be hypocritical. 90% of the people who are saying this stuff now were talking mad shit about Rhett Lashley last year. Okay, they were talking mad shit about him the year before with Derrick King. You forget that we couldn't run the football when Rhett Lashley was the offensive coordinator at all. So yeah, Lashley averaged 35 points a game. But you also have to consider the last 6 teams that they played last season when TVD was in, or those teams were horrendous defensively. That Duke defense was one of the worst defenses in college football, if not the worst. Virginia Tech was bad. Georgia Tech was bad. There's a lot of bad teams on that schedule, man. But I will give Lashley credit. He did a better job of scheming guys open than Josh Gattis has thus far this season. That's one of the things I really liked about his offense. The issue is that too many times, because they couldn't run the football, there was a lot of 3-and-outs. And when you're playing with pace, like Lashley wanted to do, which he didn't really play that fast anyway, you are going to give the ball back to the opposing team really quickly and have your defense back on the field. And that's a problem, which is one of the reasons why Mario doesn't want to play at a fast pace like that. He'll play no huddle and he'll play with some pace, but he doesn't want to go bang, bang, bang because he wants to be able to create a balance between the offense and defense and have them complement each other, where you're allowing your team to get some rest in between series. And if you happen to not pick up a first down, the defense is not exhausted and have to they just sat down, have to get right back up. Everybody has different philosophies about how to do things. And the whole thing about this offense requiring first rounders all over the field is false. It does require really good offensive linemen depending on what you want to do in the run scheme. And that's okay. I mean, don't we want to build up to that? I think, Mario's idea here is ideally to be like Georgia. That's his ideal situation. You've got the talent at tight end to do it, right? You've got guys like Georgia's 2 tight ends and Washington, and God, I forget the white kid now, number 19, Brooks. Forgot his name. Anyway, I'm not gonna look it up because I'm not that concerned, but it'll come to me. Brock Bowers. Told you. Brock Bowers. So we have that sort of tight end talent, right? We've got enough talent on the outside. Now, what it also does is when you have talent at tight end, it makes you more versatile in the run scheme and in the pass scheme. And it doesn't require you to have 3 or 4 receivers on the field at once and can go get it. It can be really effective. So it reduces the amount of receivers you actually need on the team and can be more effective in terms of your receiver recruitment. The fact that they're calling this a pro style system is a misnomer. And I think a lot of people like to throw the terms spread and pro style around and not really know what the hell they're talking about and not know what they mean. There is no such thing really as a spread system. There are spread formations, and there are systems that incorporate those spread formations 90 or 100% of the time. But within those spread formations, there are subcultures, right? There are sub schemes that make up the basis of the offense. Whether you're talking about an air raid offense, whether you're talking about the Art Briles spread the field wide vertical passing game, whether you're talking about a run based spread scheme, which is zone read based, RPO based. You're looking at a lot of different things within that spread moniker, things that have evolved over time. And when you think pro style, a lot of you are thinking under center, 2 backs. We don't do that, right? This offense that Miami's running right now would be considered spread, like 10 years ago. This style of offense is what Bama ran with Tua. It's what Penn State ran with Joe Moorhead. It was what Joe Moorhead, it's more or less what Joe Moorhead ran with Oregon. I like having tight ends on the field. I like 11, 12 personnel because of the versatility that offers. And what is 11 or 12 personnel? When you're talking personnel groupings, you're talking running back first, then tight end second. That's the second number. So 12 personnel is 1 back, 2 tight ends. 11 personnel is 1 running back, 1 tight end. Generally, in that set, you have 3 receivers, and 12 personnel, you have 2 receivers. Generally. Does that mean you can't be spread? No. You've seen it during the season, guys. You've seen us go 2 by 2 with a tight end out there. You've seen us go 3 by 1, meaning 3 to one side, 1 to the other, spread with a tight end in the game. Or 2, because those guys are athletic and can get open. Why would you do that? Does it sound dumb to you to have a tight end out there like Will Mallory instead of a receiver? Do you think it's you need to be in that kind of a set all the time? Here's why you do that. When I, as a coach, right, as a defensive coach, one of the things you monitor from the opposing team is what personnel grouping they're putting out onto the field, right? So if I'm throwing out 12 personnel, the defense now has to counter that 12 personnel. They're not going to go, uh, you know, 1 linebacker and add 2 extra DBs against a 12 personnel set, because then they're going to get hammered, right, with the run game. So you have to counter that. You have to apply your personnel to counter the offense's personnel. Same thing with 11 personnel. You need to, maybe you can go nickel, had 1 extra DB, but you can't go too light, because then they're going to take advantage of you. So when you have tight ends that are athletic, ideally you could put them in line, H, backfield, or split as a wide receiver. When you can do those things, that means you can mix what it is you're doing to the defense, and they can constantly be wrong. So one play I could line up and your base what's called ace set, right? 2 tight, 2 wide, 1 back pistol. I could also bring a guy off and have him go in H, motion him around, do different things where I'm going power run set as it looks, right? Very next play, same personnel grouping. I can go 2 by 2, 1 back, right? And I can put those 2 tight ends on the line of scrimmage as the receivers, 2 receivers in the slots. And what if I go double bubble RPO off that, right? I've got a tight end lead blocking on each side on the bubbles. I could also RPO that with a slant. Those tight ends are athletic enough to do that. So these are different things that you can do and be multiple on offense. It doesn't have to be what's called 10 personnel, which is 1 back, no tight ends, spread it all over the field. As a matter of fact, the reason why Mario wants to do this and run this style of offense is because I'll call it it's an all-weather offense, right? When you're spread, when you're air raid, when you're throwing it 6 times a game, if it rains, if it snows, guess what? You're in the shitter. Or if you run up against a team, and this is why you see these offenses are more prevalent in the Big 12, because they play quarters coverage and their defensive linemen aren't that big. That shit doesn't fly in the SEC. You saw that with Georgia and Tennessee. Tennessee was lighting people up when they're running against lightweights. And they did a really good job against Alabama, but they ran into Georgia, and all that shit got shut down because they couldn't run the football. They had no ability to. They weren't getting big plays. And once you eliminate those big plays, you're going to have to actually work the offense. What are you going to do? How are you going to get yardage? How are you going to get first downs? If you're limited to that spread scheme, at some point, you're going to need to come up with something else, because it's not always going to work. Yeah, it's going to look pretty. It's going to look great. It's going to be exciting, but it doesn't win championships necessarily. You want something that you can operate in all circumstances. And how do you operate in all circumstances? You create a team that is built from the line of scrimmage out and can dominate opponents at the line of scrimmage. So you can do whatever the hell you want to do. And that's what Mario's trying to do. You've seen it. You've seen the recruiting. You've seen what he's doing with the offensive and defense lines. If you could build an offensive and defense line that is dominant, you can run whatever the hell you want to run. You can run any scheme you want. Look up the single wing. You could run the single wing. You could run the wishbone. You could run the triple option. It doesn't matter if your offensive line can ball people. You can run whatever you want. Just look at the pockets that Stetson Bennett was getting this weekend against Tennessee. Ridiculous. Do we have that now? No. Are we wasting our time running this offense right now because we don't have that personnel? No, and I'm going to tell you why. When you're building a team, you're building a culture, and you're building an identity, you need to start that right off the bat. Because if not, if you switch things up just to be successful in the short term, what are we doing? We're talking about the same thing we just talked about earlier. We are giving up long-term success in favor of short-term wins, short-term value. Yeah, your quarterback's going to look great. Yeah, you'll probably pick up 8 wins. But what is that worth? If in the long term, it's not going to produce more wins. And if your system is that, You want to implement it as early as possible so you can figure out who the guys on the roster are that can execute that. And the ones that can't, get out. The ones that can, especially the young ones, you want to raise them in that system. You want to bring those young pups along in that system. So by the time they're sophomores or juniors, those guys live, eat, and breathe that system, and the guys behind them pick up that culture much quicker and much easier. And also, you're recruiting to that system, so it's an easier transition moving forward. And from a recruiting standpoint, you are letting everybody know this is what you do, this is what you run, this is who you are, and this is why we want you here because we think you'd fit great in the system. So Mario's ability to recruit elite players is not going to be damaged by the system. He's actually going out and getting guys that fit within it. And once those guys fit within it, and those guys that can execute it are here, it's going to look a lot better, I believe. I think if you look at Georgia's offense, if you look at offense like Kansas State, that's a beautiful offense. There are different offenses across the country. There are high-scoring offenses that aren't necessarily spread. Even TCU's offense, who's right now, who's an air raid offense, who's mainly 10 personnel, they are running more power scheme runs out of the spread and are one of the most balanced teams in the country. You got to be able to run the football, guys. You got to be able to run the football. Mike Leach hasn't won shit. I love Mike Leach. I love his offense. I love they throw it 50, 60 times a game. But that's not championship football. That's not going to win you anything. It's not easy. You got to find your identity. And at the end of the day, the scheme to me is less important than the execution of the scheme, the fit for the players. And yes, maybe the scheme doesn't fit the players we currently have on the roster right now. It doesn't necessarily. But Mario doesn't care about that because this isn't his roster. This isn't what he envisions this team looking long term. He's going to get all those guys out and he's going to backfill them in with guys that do fit his roster and his system. And then it's going to look a lot different. Right? So there you have it. There's my rant on that. Also, there's been talking about, the coordinators, what's going to happen with them. I think honestly, I believe Josh Gattis probably leaves at the end of the year just because the stink of the season, he's trying to be a head coach. He doesn't want to be around this. He wants to get out as quickly as possible and move on to another Power 5 job where he could rebuild his brand and or maybe take a head coaching job somewhere else. That's been his goal. Unless if he comes back, then he's fully committed and he believes in what's coming back. He believes in Mario. Same thing with Kevin Steele. I don't know that he comes back another year. I think he's an older guy, and this may wear on him too much. This toughness of the season, the way Mario operates, the intensity with the recruiting. I don't know if that's for him. With Gattis, to me, the issues has been his offense has been limited. It has not been the offense that I saw at Michigan, and that I even saw Joe Moorhead run at Penn State and things that were run at Alabama when he was there. He's got a system that I've seen him on video describe that he hasn't implemented yet. And I think a lot of it has to do with the quarterbacks not being able to grasp a system, the offensive line injuries, and the players just not committing to it. So I think that's hurt, but also at the same time, I think there's other things he could have done to help that transition, not just from a personal standpoint of interacting with the players, but also, maybe scheming things a little bit different. I think he's been a little stubborn. And I think that's been the thing with this coaching staff a little bit. They've been a little bit stubborn in the way they run things. Kevin Steele, is a great fundamental coach. I think he improved the tackling for the most part throughout the season. Then guys just lost their way and went back to their bullshit. Too many guys freestyling, doing whatever the hell they wanted. It doesn't seem like they're connecting with him either. I think, it's to me, FSU was the last straw. Being physically manhandled, being out of position everywhere. I think you replace him or he moves on. And I think Frank Ponce and Jamel Adai get elevated, or they should. Maybe or Charlie Strong as a DC, but I think Adai is probably the guy to do it. Which allows you then to move DVD back onto an on-field role to coach corners. Adai could coach safeties and be the defensive coordinator. DVD has earned that right now following this Cormani McLean recruitment. What he's done as a recruiter the last few years, he's earned that right to be on the field. Frank Ponce ran a great offense at Appalachian State. If Josh Gattis decides to leave, he's a guy with plenty of experience that can definitely step into that role and fill the OC void, which now allows you to have a QB as your offensive coordinator, QB coach as an offensive coordinator, which creates a tighter connection with the quarterback and the system on the field. Some people were complaining that I talked about this on Wide Right about Gattis being the OC and being the wide receivers coach, and not having an offensive coordinator that's a quarterback's coach. Teams do it both ways. At the end of the day, they're going to meet with the quarterback anyway, and they're going to be on the same page. I prefer it the other way. I prefer it to be quarterback coach and OC, but that's just me. I've had circumstances where I coached where it was offensive coordinator was also the offensive line coach, which makes sense from a schematic standpoint. And I was a quarterback's coach. Not a good one, but I was a quarterback's coach. Um, and I think with a die, you've got a guy that's may mix in some different things that haven't been used yet by Kevin Steele. I think you'll see. To me, although I'm not big on the way Manny blitz so much, and I'm not as big as although I think it's probably for the best right now. Like Kevin Steele doesn't blitz almost at all. I think there needs to be pressure packages, zone pressure packages, things that confuse the offense. And we're not doing that kind of stuff right now. We're just relying on the front four, which at this point I think is probably the best way to go because we're getting roasted on the back end anyway. But you need to also complement that with some blitz packages that create confusion for the quarterback and create turnovers. And I think maybe a die can bring some of that onto the field. He's learned from some great guys. He coached under Kirby Smart, Will Muschamp, Harley Strong now, Kevin Steele. He's learned from a lot of guys, and I think he could be a good step in that direction. What else? What else am I looking at? And in a bowl game, let's talk about being bowl eligible. To me, yeah, would it be okay? Would it be cool to watch more game? I mean, I guess. But in today's era, remember, a lot of these guys aren't going to end up playing anyway. A lot of these guys are going to sit out to preserve themselves for the transfer portal or preserve themselves from the NFL or the opportunity to try and get in the NFL. The bowl game will probably be a disaster anyway. So I don't know if making a bowl is really worth it at this point. To end up 6-6 and end up in the Shoe Shine America Diesel Cocktail Bowl. I mean, I don't particularly want to bring that trophy home necessarily. But would the 15 additional practices help the team? I don't think so either, because like I said, I think a lot of guys are going to be gone. The only thing that you can do there is, you would probably play most of the team would be the young players, and they'd get a run in that bowl game and get the extra 15 practices and be at the front of the line. But then you also have the opportunity for injury there, and you don't necessarily want that. But I mean, I'm cool if we make a bowl game. I'd like to make a bowl game. I'd like to not end up, with a losing record. But we'll see what happens moving forward. I think moving forward, one of the things that we should look forward to, I think Jakari Brown probably ends up being the starter the rest of the season. I wouldn't play TVD anymore. I don't want to get that guy hurt. I think Jake Garcia, for some reason, has a mental block now. He's turned into a turnover machine. And I think the dimension of adding Jakari Brown out in the backfield will alleviate some of that pressure from the offensive line, because now you've added an additional guy that the defense has to worry about in the run game, and that helps. Now, can he throw the ball? We'll find out. He's going to have to. And I think that's good. I think it's good that we figure out what we have in Jakari Brown, to see what he has, what his ability to grow can be, right? We need to see what his potential is. And I think that's a good thing. All right. So talk a little bit about Georgia Tech. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about their starting quarterback, right? Zach Pyron. And this comes directly from The Athletic, an article on The Athletic about the freshman report. This is written by Manny Navarro. I've heard of him before. This was written on the 10th, which was, well, today. Look at that. And he's texting me right now, so he knows I'm about to break his copyright and read some of this shit on the air. But you know what, Manny? I don't care, my man. I'm giving you free promotion. Everybody sign up for The Athletic to make up for this, okay? Please, everybody sign up for The Athletic. I dropped the jewel early about Biff Hoagie. I'm dropping a jewel now from Manny. Y'all got to sign up for The Athletic, okay? So it says here, Pyron, a 4-star from Pinson, Alabama, rallied his team to a 28-27 victory against Virginia Tech, scoring the winning touchdown on a 9-yard run with 3:30 remaining. Great. That's all we need. Another guy that can run the football from the quarterback position. Awesome. He finished 19 of 32 for 253 yards and a touchdown and an interception, and ran for 66 yards in place of injured starter Jeff Sims, who is a very dynamic guy, who missed his second consecutive game with a sprained foot. Georgia Tech trailed 27-17 when Pyron threw a 56-yard touchdown pass with 9:02 to play. He's got ice in his veins for a young kid like that, whether it's sitting in there, standing in there, and making the throws when he has to make the throws, or lowering his shoulder and getting the first down. Georgia Tech interim coach Brent Key said. So, Pyron, tough guy, athletic apparently, ice water in his veins, and a freshman, which should raise some red flags for everyone. Every time the Hurricanes play a freshman quarterback over the last 10 years, apparently, he rips us a new asshole. So you got to be on the lookout. Pyron's probably going to throw for like 400 yards and rush for 300. So there you have it. As far as Georgia Tech is concerned, they are not a great pass blocking team, which was kind of masked and covered up by Jeff Sims' abilities. I don't know if Pyron does not have that sort of elusiveness and athletic ability. He could probably get some pickup yards when needed, but they are not a good pass blocking team. I will read to you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Their last 5 pass blocking grades. Georgia Tech's last 5 pass blocking grades over the course of the season. That is a 20.8, 34.7, 43.2, 49.8, 39.3. Mind you, 64 is average, I believe, or 60 is average on PFF. That's well below average. The run blocking is okay in that same span. It's 78.8, 77.8, 48.2. Did not run the ball well against Virginia. 67.5 against Florida State and 78.4 against Virginia Tech. So I think the front four can get pressure. I think we need to be aware that they're probably going to run counter 97 times at us because they saw Florida State run it so well. Defensively, they're okay, not great. On the season, they are giving up 28 points a game, which is not fantastic. That's 83rd in the country. They are scoring 17.4 points a game, which is 124th in the country. They're averaging 323 yards a game on offense, 409, 410 essentially on defense. They're rushing for 137 on offense and 185 through the air. Defense is giving up 230 in the air, 180 on the ground, which obviously means absolutely nothing to the Miami Hurricanes because every time they've run up against a bad run defense, they have run away from it. They have not done shit. But hopefully this past week we picked up a little steam. Last 2 weeks running the ball a little bit better. Who knows? Let's see what happens. Their coverage grades are okay. They only have one really bad one, which was against Florida State. Florida State lit them up through the air. That was a 45.3 there. They are an average tackling team. Florida State also made them look bad, 28.7. I can guarantee you, I think our grade against Florida State was lower than that, though. And their pass rush grade is average, in the 60s, mid 60s. Highest it was the season was against Virginia Tech, which is a 75.3. So I imagine this is going to be like a 3-point ball game. This is probably going to look a lot like the Virginia game. It's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be back and forth. The difference may be, can Jakari Brown inject some energy into this offense? The offensive line is decimated right now. You're going to have to move the pocket a lot, get him out on the edge to throw the football, throw quick stuff, bubbles, screens, quick screens, RPO stuff. Get him to get rid of the ball quickly because he's probably not going to have a lot of time to do it. You're probably going to see quarterback powers from him, straight quarterback draws, zone reads, things of that nature to try and involve him in the run game to try and make Georgia Tech defend all 11 players in the field or account for them. And that is pretty much it, man. That's all I had. Let's say Canes win by 3 Saturday. That's what I'm gonna go with. I can't pick against them. Look at me. For those of you who believe that I just do this shit for the podcast, I was dressed like this all day and just happened to find the time to podcast. This wasn't planned for the podcast. I just walk around like this, man. See this? I just walk around like this. This is who I am. It's unfortunate. My wife hates it. No, she doesn't, but depends on where I'm going. She can hate it. She hates other things too, related to the podcast. Specifically guests that I have on. I'm not going to talk about that though, because that's a secret. But there you have it. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit me up, like videos, comment videos. I'm responding to people on YouTube all the time. Trying to interact with fans. Interacting with fans via DM. Make sure you like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, spread it around if you feel it's worthy of it. And that's pretty much it, man. Thank you guys. Appreciate the support. It's been a long, rough season, but we're here to vent. We're here to help each other out. And speaking of venting, I really vented on that Wide Right podcast. So if you want to check that out, go do it. All right. Peace out. Go Canes.